They didn't attack you. They didn't insult you. They didn't even raise their voice. And yet, something inside you started to feel smaller, quieter, uncertain. You walked away, but not the same person who walked in, and you still don't fully understand why. But here's what most people miss. That wasn't random. That wasn't mood. That was strategy. And this is where everything changes. Because by the end of this video, you're going to understand something most people never see. Not the obvious manipulation, not the loud control, but the silent method a narcissist uses when they realize you're too strong to control directly. And I need to warn you, because once you see this, you won't just recognize it in others. You'll start recognizing where it's already happened to you. Now, think about this for a moment. There's always that one person. At first, they seem drawn to your strength, your clarity, your ability to stay calm when others react. They admire it. They even praise it. But slowly, something shifts. The same strength they were attracted to becomes something they try to reshape. Not openly, not aggressively, but quietly. And this is the part no one tells you. A narcissist doesn't attack strength directly. They dismantle it indirectly. If this is already hitting close to home, type 1 in the comments. Not for engagement, but because recognizing it is the first moment you step out of it. Now, here's where things start to get deeper. Because what you're dealing with is not just behavior, it's perception, pattern recognition, and psychological positioning. Daniel Kahneman talked about how the human mind operates in two systems. One fast, emotional, automatic. The other slow, logical, analytical. And a narcissist knows how to operate inside that fast system. They don't need to prove anything logically. They just need to create enough emotional friction that you begin questioning yourself. And once that happens, the control is already in place. Now, let's talk about something deeper, because not everyone reacts the same way to this. There are people who immediately recognize manipulation. And then there are people who feel it before they understand it. These are often empaths, but not in the way people casually describe it. Not just someone who feels more. An empath processes emotional pattern. They don't just hear what is said. They register what is missing. They notice tone, consistency, subtle changes in behavior, even when nothing is said directly. And this is where everything begins. Because when a narcissist encounters someone like this, they realize something quickly. Direct control won't work. So they switch strategies, and this is where the real game starts. They begin creating small moments that seem harmless. They dismiss your feelings, but gently they question your reactions. But subtly, they shift conversations just enough to avoid depth. And at first, it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like confusion. You start asking yourself questions. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe it's not that serious. And this is where everything changes. Because the moment you start questioning your own perception, they no longer need to control you. You begin doing it for them. But here's what most people miss. This doesn't happen in one moment. It happens through repetition, small patterns, repeated over time. And the brain, especially the emotional centers, learns through repetition. So each time your reality is slightly dismissed, slightly redirected, slightly minimized, your internal certainty weakens. Not suddenly, But gradually, and this is the part no one tells you, the goal is not to break you. The goal is to make you unsure of yourself. Because a strong person with clarity is impossible to control. But a strong person who doubts themselves becomes predictable. And this is where the strategy becomes dangerous. Because from the outside, you still look strong. You still function. You still think. You still respond. But internally, something has shifted. You hesitate more. You explain yourself more. You second guess your reactions. And this is where the narcissist gains ground. Not through power, but through subtle influence. And here's what makes it even more complex. You don't immediately pull away, because there is still connection, still familiarity, still moments that feel real. And those moments keep you engaged, keep you trying, keep you hoping that things will return to how they were. But here's what most people miss. Those moments are not accidental. They are part of the pattern. Just enough warmth to keep the connection alive. Just enough confusion to keep you questioning. And just enough distance to keep you off balance. And this is where everything starts to build. Because over time, you are no longer reacting to reality. You are reacting to the pattern. And once that happens, you lose clarity. And without clarity, even the strongest person starts to feel uncertain. And this is only the beginning, because in the next part, we're going to break down something deeper. Why this strategy doesn't just confuse you, it slowly rewires how you experience yourself inside the connection. And once that happens, you don't just question them. You start questioning who you are. They don't raise their voice. They don't create obvious conflict. And yet, something inside you keeps tightening. You explain more. You justify more. You try to be clearer, calmer, better, and still, it doesn't land. But here's what most people miss. This is not miscommunication. This is positioning. And this is where everything changes. Because when a narcissist sees you as too strong, they don't overpower you. They slowly shift the frame, so you begin adjusting yourself to fit them. Now, pay attention to this. At first, they listen. They seem present. They let you speak. But when it actually matters, when something is important to you, their response changes. Not completely, just enough. They hear your words, but they don't meet your feeling. You express something real, and they respond with logic. You share something vulnerable, and they redirect the conversation. You try to connect, and they stay slightly out of reach. And this is the part no one tells you. Emotional dismissal doesn't always look like rejection. Sometimes it looks like calm indifference. And that is far more destabilizing, because you don't feel attacked. You feel unseen. Now here's what happens inside you. Especially if you're someone who processes deeply. You don't react immediately. You don't create conflict. You try to understand. Maybe they didn't realize. Maybe I didn't explain it clearly. Maybe I need to approach this differently. And this is where everything shifts. Because instead of them adjusting to you, you start adjusting to them. And that adjustment is where the control begins. But here's what most people miss. This doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like effort. It feels like you're trying to make the connection work. But underneath that, something is quietly changing. Each time your feelings are not fully acknowledged, your brain registers a gap. Not a loud one, a subtle one. And the brain does something very specific with gaps. It tries to fill them. So you start explaining more, clarifying more, making your emotions easier to understand. And in doing that, you slowly move away from your natural self. And this is where everything becomes dangerous. Because you're no longer expressing who you are. You're adapting who you are to be understood by someone who is not trying to understand you. Now, let's go deeper. Because this pattern doesn't stay isolated. It spreads into how you communicate, into how you react, into how you interpret your own emotions. You start filtering yourself. Before speaking, you think, will this be dismissed? Before reacting, you think, is this too much? Before feeling, you think, is this even valid? And this is the part no one tells you. The moment you start questioning your own emotional validity, the narcissist no longer needs to invalidate you. It's already happening internally. And this is where everything changes. Because now the control is not external anymore. It's internal. You carry it with you into every interaction. Now here's the deeper layer. Even in this state, you still feel connected. There are still moments where they show warmth, moments where they seem present again. And those moments reset your perception. They make you question the pattern. They make you think, maybe it's not like that. And this is the part most people never see clearly. Consistency is not what keeps you attached. Intermittent consistency is unpredictable attention, unpredictable validation, just enough to keep you engaged. And this is where everything starts to build, because your brain begins chasing clarity, trying to understand the pattern, trying to make sense of the inconsistency. And that chase creates emotional dependency, not on the person, but on the resolution. And here's what most people miss. You're not staying because of how they treat you. You're staying because you're trying to resolve how it feels. And that feeling is intentionally left unresolved. Now, pay attention to this. Over time, this pattern creates something deeper than confusion. It creates imbalance. You give more attention, more explanation, more emotional energy, and they give less. Not dramatically, just enough to keep the dynamic uneven. And this is where the strategy becomes clear. Because a narcissist doesn't need control through force. They create control through imbalance. And imbalance keeps you off center. Now here's the part no one tells you. When you're off center, you're easier to influence. You question yourself more. You rely on their responses more. You look to them for confirmation. And this is where everything locks in. Because once you begin seeking validation from the same person who creates your uncertainty, the cycle is complete. And this is only the second layer, because in the next part, we're going to go deeper into something even more powerful. How a narcissist uses guilt, not to control your actions, but to control your identity. And once that happens, you don't just feel confused. You start feeling responsible for things that were never yours. They don't accuse you directly. They don't blame you in obvious ways. And yet, you start feeling responsible for their mood, for their silence, for the tension you can't even explain. But here's what most people miss. Guilt doesn't always come from accusation. Sometimes it's created through suggestion. And this is where everything changes. Because when a narcissist sees you as too strong, they don't try to overpower your decisions. They try to reshape how you see yourself inside the situation. Now, pay attention to this. At some point, they begin introducing small statements, not direct, not aggressive, just enough to land, without being questioned. I guess I just care more than you do. I'm always the one trying. You've changed. And on the surface, these sound like feelings. Not manipulation, but here's the part no one tells you. Statements like this don't aim to communicate. They aim to reposition. They subtly move you into a role where you feel like the one who is lacking. And this is where everything begins to shift. Now, inside you, something very specific happens. You pause, not because you agree, but because you're unsure, and uncertainty is all it takes. You start replaying your behavior. Was I distant? Did I miss something? Am I not showing up enough? And this is the moment the pattern deepens, because instead of evaluating them, you start evaluating yourself. And this is the part most people never notice. The focus shifts from their behavior to your identity. Now, here's what happens next. You begin compensating. You try harder. You explain more. You show more care, not because you did something wrong, but because you now feel like you might have. And this is where the strategy becomes powerful. Because guilt doesn't just change behavior. It changes motivation. You're no longer acting from clarity. You're acting from correction. Trying to fix something that was never clearly broken. Now let's go deeper. Because this doesn't stop at behavior. It starts affecting how you define yourself. You begin asking deeper questions. Am I too distant? Am I too much? Am I not enough? And this is where everything becomes dangerous. Because once guilt enters identity, it becomes harder to separate what's real from what's suggested. And the brain, especially the emotional system, tries to resolve that tension. It wants alignment. So it starts adjusting not just your actions, but your self-perception. And this is where the control becomes internal. You don't just change what you do. You begin changing how you see yourself. Now, here's the deeper layer. Even in this state, they still show moments of warmth. Moments where they appreciate you. Moments where they acknowledge you again. And those moments feel like relief. They confirm that your effort worked, that you're back on track. And this is the part no one tells you. Relief after guilt is one of the strongest emotional reinforcements because your brain connects effort with validation. So you keep adjusting, you keep trying, you keep aligning yourself with their shifting expectations. And this is where the imbalance deepens. Because now you're not just responding to them, you're reacting to the fear of losing their approval. And that fear keeps you engaged, even when something doesn't feel right. Now, pay attention to this. Over time, this creates a loop. You feel uncertain, you try to fix it. You receive brief validation. Then uncertainty returns, and the cycle repeats. And this is the part most people never see clearly. You're not staying because of connection. You're staying because of the cycle. Trying to resolve something that keeps resetting. And this is where everything locks in. Because once guilt becomes part of the connection, walking away doesn't feel like clarity. It feels like failure, like you're giving up, like you didn't try enough. And that feeling keeps you in place, even when everything inside you is telling you something is off. And this is only the third layer, because in the next part, we're going to go even deeper into something that changes everything completely. Boundary violation. Not the obvious kind, not the loud kind, but the subtle crossing of limits that slowly disconnects you from yourself. And once that happens, you don't just feel responsible. You stop feeling safe. They don't cross your boundaries in obvious ways. They don't force you. They don't demand control. And yet, somehow, your limits keep shifting. But here's what most people miss. Boundaries are not always broken loudly. Sometimes they are eroded quietly. And this is where everything changes. Because when a narcissist sees you as too strong, they don't attack your limits directly. They move them slowly. Now, pay attention to this. At first, they respect you. They seem understanding. They even admire your independence. But over time, they begin testing small things. They interrupt you more. They push conversations further than you're comfortable with. They expect access to your time, your attention, your energy, without asking. And each moment feels small, not enough to confront, not enough to react strongly. So you let it pass. And this is the part no one tells you. Boundaries don't collapse in one moment. They shift through what you allow repeatedly. Now here's what happens inside you. You notice it, not consciously at first, but as a feeling, a slight discomfort, a hesitation, but then you rationalize it. It's not that serious. They didn't mean it like that. I don't want to make this a problem. And this is where everything begins to change. Because the moment you ignore your own boundary, your brain registers something important. This limit is flexible. And once a limit becomes flexible, it becomes easier to move again. And again, and again. Now let's go deeper, because this isn't just about behavior. It's about safety. Boundaries are what create emotional safety. They tell your mind, I'm respected here. But when boundaries are repeatedly crossed, even subtly, that sense of safety begins to fade. Not all at once, but gradually. And this is the part most people never notice. You don't suddenly feel unsafe. You start feeling slightly off, less open, less relaxed, less yourself. And over time, that feeling becomes normal. You adapt to it. You adjust your behavior to avoid that discomfort. You speak less freely. You share less openly. You hold back parts of yourself that once came naturally. And this is where everything becomes dangerous. Because you're no longer acting from who you are. You're acting from what feels acceptable in that environment. Now here's the deeper layer. Even in this state, they still show moments of respect. Moments where they seem understanding again. And those moments reset your perception. They make you question the pattern. Maybe it's not like that. Maybe I'm overreacting. And this is the part no one tells you. Inconsistency doesn't weaken control. It strengthens it because it keeps you uncertain. And uncertainty makes you less likely to enforce your boundaries. Now, pay attention to this. Over time, this creates something very specific. You stop trusting your own limits. You question them. Was that actually a boundary? Am I being too strict? Should I just let this go? And this is where everything shifts internally. Because once you stop trusting your own boundaries, you stop protecting yourself. Not intentionally, but automatically. And this is where the narcissist gains the most control. Not by breaking your boundaries, but by making you unsure they exist. Now, here's the key moment most people miss. At this stage, you're still present in the connection, still engaged, still trying, but internally, you're no longer fully safe. And when safety disappears, something else begins to take its place. Distance, not physical distance, emotional distance. You begin pulling back, not dramatically, not consciously, but instinctively. And this is where everything starts to shift again. Because when someone begins to feel unsafe, they don't stay open. They start protecting themselves. And that protection creates space. And this is where the narcissist strategy reveals its next layer. Because once you start creating space, they don't pull away. They lean in just enough to keep you from fully leaving. And this push and pull keeps the connection unstable, unresolved. And this is where everything becomes harder to understand. Because now you're not just dealing with behavior. You're dealing with a pattern that keeps shifting under you. And this is only one part of the strategy. Because in the next part, we're going to go deeper into something that silently destroys connection over time. Lack of reciprocity. And why one-sided emotional effort doesn't just drain you. It slowly removes you from your own center. They don't stop showing up. They don't disappear completely. And that's exactly why it takes longer to see what's happening. Because the problem isn't absence, it's imbalance. But here's what most people miss. Imbalance doesn't feel like a problem at first. It feels like you just need to try a little more. And this is where everything changes. At the beginning, the effort feels mutual. You listen, they listen, you share, they respond. There's a rhythm, a flow, and that flow creates connection. But slowly, something shifts. Not dramatically, just enough. You start initiating more. You start asking more questions. You start checking in more often, and they respond. But they don't initiate the same way anymore. They reply, but they don't reach. They engage, but they don't invest. And this is the part no one tells you. Reciprocity doesn't disappear suddenly. It fades through small differences in effort. Now pay attention to this. At first, you don't notice. Or you notice, but you justify it. They're just busy. They're going through something. They show it differently. And that may be true, but your brain is still tracking something deeper, a shift in energy, and the brain keeps a quiet record of emotional exchange, not logically, but through feeling. I'm giving more, I'm trying more, I'm carrying more. And for a while, you ignore that feeling because the connection still matters. But here's where everything begins to change. That feeling doesn't disappear. It accumulates. Each moment where you give and don't feel it returned adds weight. Not all at once, but gradually, and this is the part most people never see clearly. You're not just interacting anymore. You're compensating, trying to maintain a balance that no longer exists. Now here's what happens next. You start adjusting your behavior. You reach out more. You explain more. You try to keep the connection alive. And from the outside, it looks like effort. But internally, something else is forming. Disappointment, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and persistent. And disappointment is dangerous because it doesn't push you away immediately. It reshapes how you feel over time. Now, let's go deeper. Even in this stage, they still give something back. A message, a response, a moment of attention. And that small return keeps you engaged because it feels like proof that the connection is still there. And this is where everything becomes more complex. Because now you're not reacting to reality. You're reacting to hope, to the possibility that things will return to balance. But here's what most people miss. Hope can sustain imbalance longer than logic can. And this is why the pattern continues. Now pay attention to this. Over time, you begin noticing the difference more clearly. The effort you give and the effort you receive are no longer equal. And once that becomes clear, the feeling changes from effort to awareness. And awareness is where the shift begins. Because once you see the imbalance, you can't unsee it. Now, here's the key moment. You stop trying to fix it, not out of anger, not out of rejection, but out of realization, I'm the only one holding this together. And that realization changes everything. Because from that moment on, your energy starts pulling back. Not completely, but enough to create distance. And this is where the dynamic shifts again. Because when you stop compensating, the imbalance becomes visible. Not just to you, but to them. And this is the moment most people don't expect. Instead of restoring balance, the narcissist adjusts the pattern again. They give just enough to pull you back in. A message, a moment of attention, a brief return of connection, and that moment resets your perception for a while, and this creates a loop: effort, imbalance, awareness, temporary balance, then back again. And this is where everything locks in, because the connection is no longer stable. It becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability creates emotional dependency, not on the person, but on the pattern. Now, here's the part most people never see clearly. You're not staying because of what they give you. You're staying because of what you're trying to restore. The original balance, the original feeling, and that keeps you engaged even when it's no longer present. And this is where the strategy becomes complete. Because a narcissist doesn't need to give consistently. They only need to give occasionally to keep you invested. Now, here's the deeper truth. At this stage, you're still strong, still aware, still capable of seeing what's happening. But something inside you is now divided. Part of you sees the pattern, and part of you still hopes it will change. And that internal split is what keeps the connection alive, even when it no longer feels right. But here's what most people miss. This is not where the story ends, because there's one more layer that changes everything completely. In the next part, we're going to bring all of this together. And this is where the realization happens. The moment where you stop trying and finally understand what was happening the entire time. But here's what most people miss. At some point, it stops being about them. And this is where everything changes. Because there is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, where you stop trying to understand them and start seeing the pattern clearly. Not emotionally, not reactively, but objectively. And that moment is where the control begins to break. Now pay attention to this. Up until now, every part of the connection has kept you engaged. Confusion made you think. Guilt made you adjust. Imbalance made you try. Inconsistency made you hope. And all of that kept your attention locked in. But once you step back and see it as a pattern, something inside you shifts. You stop asking, why are they like this? And you start asking something deeper. What is this dynamic doing to me? And this is where everything changes, because the focus moves from them to you. Now here's what happens next. You begin noticing things you ignored before. How often you felt unsure. How often you explained yourself. How often you adjusted just to keep things stable. And slowly, you begin to see the cost, not in big dramatic ways, but in subtle changes within yourself. You became quieter. more cautious, less certain. And this is the part no one tells you. The narcissist strategy doesn't just affect the connection. It affects your sense of self inside the connection. Now here's where it goes deeper. Once you see that clearly, you can't go back to how it felt before. Because awareness changes perception, and perception changes experience. So even if they act the same, you don't feel the same anymore. And this is the turning point, because this is where your strength returns. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. You stop reacting automatically. You pause. You observe. You notice the pattern as it's happening. And this is where the control breaks. Because the entire strategy depends on one thing. Your unconscious participation. Once you become conscious of it, it loses its power. Now here's the key shift. You stop trying to fix the connection. Not because you don't care, but because you finally understand that it was never meant to be balanced. And this realization creates distance. Not forced, not emotional, natural. And this is where everything changes again. Because when you stop feeding the pattern begins to collapse. Now pay attention to this. At this stage, they may try to re-engage. Not in the same way, but differently. More attention, more presence, more effort, temporarily. And this is the part most people fall back into, because it looks like change. But here's what most people miss. It's not change. It's response, a response to losing control of the pattern. And once the pattern stabilizes again, that effort fades and the cycle repeats. But this time, you see it clearly. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And this is where your power fully returns. Not by controlling them, but by no longer being controlled by the pattern. Now, let's slow this down for a moment. If you're in this stage where something inside you is starting to feel clear, but you're not fully detached yet, that's normal. Because clarity doesn't always come with immediate action. Sometimes it comes with quiet understanding. And that understanding slowly changes your behavior. You respond less, you explain less, you invest less. Not out of anger, but out of awareness. And this is where everything shifts completely. Because the connection no longer feels like something you need to fix. It feels like something you finally understand. And understanding creates freedom. But here's the final layer. Because in the next part, we're going to bring everything together. Not in a dramatic way, but in a clear one. The kind of clarity that allows you to see exactly why this happened and why it couldn't have ended any other way. And here's the part most people miss. It doesn't end with a fight. It doesn't end with a clear explanation. It ends when something inside you becomes quiet again. Not confused, not reactive, just clear. And this is where everything finally makes sense. Because the entire strategy was never about controlling your actions. It was about controlling your perception, how you see yourself, how you interpret their behavior, how much you question your own reality. And once that perception is influenced, the connection sustains itself without force. Now pay attention to this. Everything you experienced, the confusion, the guilt, the imbalance, the inconsistency, it all served one purpose: to keep you engaged without ever giving you full clarity. Because clarity ends the cycle. And this is where the shift becomes final. The moment you stop trying to figure it out and simply see it for what it is, a pattern, not a misunderstanding, not a temporary phase, a pattern, And this is where everything changes completely. Because once you see the pattern, you stop personalizing it. You stop asking, what did I do wrong? And you start understanding, this is how it works. And that understanding removes the emotional hook. Now, here's the deeper truth. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were simply not controllable in a direct way. And that's why the strategy became indirect, subtle, psychological, designed to create internal shifts instead of external pressure. But here's what most people don't realize. That strategy only works as long as you don't see it. The moment you do, it loses its effect. Now, let's bring this together. If you're the one who experienced this, and you're starting to feel that quiet clarity, don't rush to react. Don't rush to explain. Just observe how different everything feels now. The same words, but less impact. The same behavior, but more visible. And this is the part where your strength returns, not as resistance, but as awareness. Now, shift perspective for a moment. If you're someone who lost a person like this, someone who stopped reacting, stopped explaining, stopped trying, it didn't happen suddenly. They didn't just change. They understood. And once they understood, they could no longer participate the same way. Because clarity makes certain patterns impossible to ignore. Now, here's the final insight. A narcissist doesn't fear weakness. They understand it. They can work with it, but they struggle with clarity because clarity removes the space where manipulation exists. And this is why the moment you stop questioning yourself, the entire dynamic begins to fall apart. Not because you fought it, but because you saw it, and seeing is enough. So the next time you find yourself in a connection that feels confusing, don't rush to fix it. Pause. Observe the pattern. Notice what keeps repeating. Notice what keeps shifting. And most importantly, notice how you feel within it. Because your experience is the most accurate signal you have. Empaths don't need perfection. They don't need constant reassurance. They need honesty, consistency, emotional safety. And if that's not present, they won't stay long enough to explain why. Because when something is real, it doesn't make you question yourself. It doesn't make you adjust your identity. It doesn't make you feel uncertain about your own reality. It feels steady, clear, recognizable. And once you experience that kind of clarity, you stop chasing confusing connections and start recognizing the ones that make sense. And that is something no strategy can take away from you.